The revised social principles of the United Methodist Church are divided into four major sections. One, the community of all creation. Secondly, the economic community. Thirdly, the social community. And fourth, the political community. Now, this week, we're concluding the section on the social community as we explore two social principles. First, racism, ethnocentricism, and tribalism. And the second one, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. Now, these two social issues are often the subject of research projects, books, movies, semester-long courses in academic settings. Yeah, I know it's foolish on my part to attempt to deal with these issues in a 15-minute video, but as a fool, I'm willing to give it a try. First of all, racism, ethnocentrism, and tribalism. This title is another illustration of the global nature of the social principles. Whereas racism is a subject of attention in the Western world, ethnocentrism is the word that describes the same issue in the Eastern world, and tribalism is the word describing the issue in the Southern world. I want to focus on what unites these three, the common thread of these three, and that is the suffix of all three words. That is ISM, ism. When ism is attached to a word in the English language, it means that the subject is the guiding principle in the life of an individual or the life of a community. Now, through the lens of faith, this is important to understand. For persons of faith, their guiding principle is for Christians the basic tenet of our faith, and that is that we must have sacrificial and empathetic love for others. When any ism replaces that for Christians or a basic tenet of any other religious faith, when any ism replaces one's faith as the guiding principle for life, that ism becomes the foundation of one's identity and is the determining factor in one's relationship with others. Let me say that again. When any ism replaces one's faith as the guiding principle, it becomes the foundation of one's identity and is the determining factor in one's relationship with others. Now, in other words, when one's race, ethnicity, or tribe becomes the guiding principle of one's life, all of a sudden differences are the source of conflict rather than acceptance. Differences are experienced as threats rather than inquiry. And differences are the source of attitudes of superiority rather than cooperation. I want to say that again as well. When one's race, with one's ethnicity, when one's tribe becomes the guiding principle of one's life, differences are the source of conflict rather than acceptance. Their differences are experiences of threats rather than inquiry, and differences are the source of attitudes of superiority rather than cooperation. You know, therefore, the social principles state we condemn racism, ethnocentrism, tribalism, and any ideology or social practice based on false and misleading beliefs or ideologies that one group of human beings is superior to all other groups of human beings. It's an advice of condemnation. Now, this advice is clear and unbending because it's based on a tenet of our faith as followers of Jesus. All human beings are equal as children of God. No individual or group is superior to any other for any reason, particularly because of race, ethnicity, or tribe. That's pretty clear advice to the global community of faith. One does not have to be anything more than a casual consumer of the news to be convinced that these isms are alive and well and growing in every part of our world in 2025. The advice is certainly needed, and from the perspective of faith, very welcome. The second advice we're exploring this week is sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. As United Methodists, we've got to pause and be thankful that the United Methodist Church, as well as other mainline Protestant churches in the United States, have provided the leadership to the movement that we must acknowledge the existence of sexual harassment, abuse, and assault, and have taken steps to be sure it is addressed first by the church and also in the workplace, also in the places of entertainment and play, and in the home. This has been a 60-year effort of leadership by the mainline Protestant community. Personal story, if you will. An investigating reporter from a leading national newspaper called me for an interview because at that time I had presided at more church trials, which included this issue of sexual harassment, than any other bishop. This reporter was assigned to compile evidence that mainline Protestant churches were as guilty as any other religious body of covering up sexual harassment. Indeed, churches at that time, religious bodies, were the subject of widespread media coverage of their practices of cover-up. This reporter was surprised when I read from the United Methodist Book of Discipline, the governing law of the church, that required me as a bishop of the church to, within a certain number of days, begin due process and transparency among all parties affected by reported instances of sexual harassment, abuse. The reporter asked, well, I appreciate the law, but what if you don't do that, Bishop? And I simply continued reading that the failure to fulfill this requirement would lead to charges being filed against me for maladministration. He then jokingly asked, okay, I appreciate the words, but has this ever happened? And I replied, yes, and offered to meet with him personally with legal counsel to share my personal involvement in the adjudication of charges against bishops. That article was never written. Now, this is not to say that the United Methodist Church has eradicated sexual harassment and abuse within our community of faith. I share the story to say that we have been a leader in the United States to confess, name, and claim the issue and respond with empathy and grace to all, including victims, guilty persons, and falsely accused persons. All three I've personally experienced many times. Victims, guilty persons, and falsely accused persons. Our social principles state recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We condemn sexual harassment, abuse, and assault and consider them grave violations of the established behavioral norms within the church, as well as within the larger society. Sexual abuse or molestation entails unwanted sexual activity perpetrated through the use of force or threats and taking advantage of those who are unable to give consent or those in vulnerable situations with unequal power. We advocate the development and implementation of comprehensive policies and practices in relation to cases of suspected sexual abuse and assault. Pretty clear, isn't it? All persons are equal. All persons are of sacred worth. Sexual harassment, abuse, and assault are behaviors which contradict this basic tenet of our faith. There's a lot there. But for your thought and conversation, a couple of questions. First of all, what is your response to the understanding that, quote, isms often replace faith as the guiding principle for the life of individuals or groups? And secondly, what commonly practiced instances of sexual harassment and abuse often go unnoticed and ignored in our life together today? Thanks for being a part of our journey.